All right, welcome back to Algebra 1 Summer Prep. We're going to piggyback up with Lesson 8, but we are going to make a big adjustment to this. So if you notice Lesson 8, and double check that yours are in the correct order in the binder, it should start with this, Lesson 8, Solving Systems Algebraically, and it should say Substitution Method on the first page. The second page should say the Elimination Method. And if yours is ordered differently, or maybe it's mixed up with the practice sheets, I would just put those two back to back. Now, whenever I put these together with both methods, I knew we wouldn't get through both of them in one lesson, so I decided that whichever one we didn't do, we could save it for our last day if we have time to come back. And in deciding which one to do, I actually decided that we should do the elimination method first. If I had to pick one, I would go with this. I do think you'll use this one more often, especially whenever you get to Algebra 2. So it's a really important method. So we are going to focus just on this elimination method in this video. And I might do like a separate little bonus video for this one, just in case we don't get to it and you want to learn that method as well. Okay, let's zoom in here and talk about what we're even talking about when I say elimination method. So we are continuing our discussion on solving systems of equations. So if you look at the problems, they should look really similar to the ones we did in the last lesson. The only thing is we're not graphing them. Like, they don't give you like a little XY coordinate plane to graph the lines on and find where they intersect and all that. So we are going to be solving these, meaning finding where, if we did graph them, where they would intersect, finding that point, but we're going to do it in a different method, an algebraic method, rather than a graphing method, okay? And within that, there's so many ways to solve, so we're going to focus on what's called the elimination method of solving systems. So let's go ahead and fill in all of the blanks here so you have a good 4-step process that you can refer back to. And then we'll use that while we go through number 1 to make more sense of it. So if you take a look at step 1, it says make sure the equations are lined up. Now, I made life a lot easier for you guys, and they are all lined up. And most likely when you first start learning these, the ones they give you will be lined up as well. So let me show you what that means, by the way. So when we say they need to be lined up, like you want them kind of stacked right on top of each other, where your X ones are lined up, your Y variables are lined up, you got like an equal sign right here, and the other numbers are lined up. Everything's like stacked on top of each other. And I created it that way so you don't really have to worry about that first step. Okay, step number 2 is the big one. You are going to decide whether you add or subtract your equations. So let's fill that in first of all. So we know we're going to add or subtract. Add or subtract the equations to eliminate, that's where that word comes from, the variable with common coefficients. Okay, so basically what that is saying is, and you may not have realized you can do this, but you can take 2 equations and you can add them together, or you can subtract them, and that's what you're going to decide in step 2, which one is going to be best here. And when I say add and subtract, I literally mean like we're going to go draw a line under this, put a plus sign out here, and we're going to straight up like add these together. Like we're going to have a result down here, right? We're going to add all of them. So we'll get to that, and we'll figure out as we work through these 5 practice problems when you should add versus when you should subtract. Okay. After you add or subtract your equations, you'll get a resulting equation, and then step number 3, you're going to solve for the remaining variable. So you'll solve that equation. And then our very last step, after you solve that little equation, the technical words you would put here, and I'm going to give you an option of what you want to write, would be substitute your answer into either original equation and solve for the other variable. Since these are your notes, I have a lot of kids say plug in the number instead of substitute in the number. So if this makes more sense to you, instead of substitute, you could just say plug your answer into either original equation and solve for the other variable. So this is technically a substitute, but it's your notes that you're going to look back on, and if plugging in your answer makes more sense, go for that word. All right, let's jump in here and make sense of this little 4-step process. All right, number one. Okay, so step number one says to have everything lined up, which we have, and then step number two says you're either going to add or subtract your equations. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just tell you for this first one, it's going to be best if we add them, and I will show you why as we solve it. So I'm going to draw a line under it and put a plus sign. Some people like to rewrite the two equations off to the side and then draw the line, but it's just so much easier to just draw the line under it now. Okay, we are adding now, so we're adding straight down. So we're going to add 10x plus negative 2x, so 10 plus negative 2, which would be 8, and just don't forget the x, so 8x. And then look what happens right here. We're going to do negative 3y plus a positive 3y. Negative 3 plus 3, that's just 0. So those cancel out, aka get eliminated, which is why it's called the elimination method. This is what you want to happen. So let me draw a line through that. Eliminated, so I'm not even going to write 0. I'm not going to write anything under. I'm just going to cancel them out. And then we're going to write our equal sign next. And of course, a lot of people forget this. You still have to add on this side as well. Okay, so we're doing 18 plus 6 to give us 24. All right, so let's actually, because I want to make sense of this 4-step process so you guys can go back and use it. We did step number 2. We add or subtracted the equations to eliminate the variable with common coefficients. I guess I should put an S on that. Coefficients. Oh, there we go. That just means the ones, if you'll notice, the ones that got eliminated, they both had a 3 right here and here, and that's how it's usually going to happen. Okay, and step number 3 is where we're at now. Now we solve for the remaining variable. So the y variable got eliminated in this problem, and it left us with this equation. Now it's kind of spread out. If you want to push that together so it looks a little bit more like an equation, it's just the equation 8x equals 24. Now we solve this. This is just a one-step equation, which we know to solve for x, we can divide both sides by 8. And we get x equals 3. Then I have a lot of kids that are like, yay, we're done, I solved for x. Okay, you're only halfway done when you get this far. Let me circle the 3, just so we know that is half of our answer. But keep in mind what we're doing here, y'all. When you solve a system, you are finding the intersection point of those two equations like we did in the last lesson. We're just not doing it by graphing them, but we're still finding a coordinate in the end. So far, we have half the coordinate. We know the x coordinate is 3, so if I were going to write that point, I know it's 3 comma something. So I need to figure out what that something is, what that y variable is. And that's always going to be our last step. And you've actually done the hardest part. The last step of finding the other variable, it might seem complicated at first, but that's actually a relatively easy part of solving the problem. So what I usually do is I find my variable and I kind of draw, I draw like a little arrow over here to show I'm still using this to continue my problem. Okay, let's look at our step process. Where are we at here? Okay, we did step number 3, check. We solved for the variable, x equals 3. We are on our last step of 4, where we plug this answer into either original equation, and then we will solve for the other variable when we do that. So at this point, after you solve for your variable, pick either of your original equations, okay? I'm just kind of looking at it as if there's not this line I have drawn through. I'm going to pick either the top one or the bottom one. It doesn't matter which one you pick. I'll go ahead and just pick the top one. That is personal preference. And what I do is I rewrite that equation. So I picked the 10x minus 3y equals 18 equation. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug my answer in that I got over here, my x equals 3. And since it is the value of x, right, x equals 3, that means I can replace any x I see over here with that number that I just found for it. So x equals 3, so I'm going to plug in a 3 wherever I see x, right there. So I'm literally going to take out the x and put in a 3 in its place. Well, let's write that next. So instead of 10x, remember that means 10 times x. I'm going to make it 10 times 3. And the way I show that is I put parentheses around whatever number I'm substituting in for the variable or plugging in for the variable. So 10 times 3, that's what that means, and I write everything else the same. Minus 3y equals 18. Okay, make sure you look at that and you understand what I just did. I took the 3, it equals x, so I plug 3 in for the x, which now looks like this. All right, now I'm going to solve this equation to get the y variable by itself. So my next step would actually be do 10 times 3, that's going to give me 30, and write everything else down. Minus 3y equals 18. And we are just solving an equation now. So if you have trouble solving equations, you might want to go back to some of our earlier videos and recap our two-step equations. But basically, to solve for y, you want to get rid of all these things that are around it. And to do that, you want to start with the thing furthest from it. So first I want to get rid of the 30. So I am going to subtract the 30 from both sides. So 30 minus 30, that cancels out and goes to 0. I bring down negative 3y equals 18 minus 30. That's going to give me what? Negative 12. And then last step would be I divide by negative 3 to get rid of that. And so we end up, I move this over here, we get y equals negative 12 divided by negative 3, that's just going to give me positive 4. And then we found our y variable. So now you've got an x over here that hopefully you circled and a y that I circle. And then when you put it together in the end to actually answer the question, you want to write it as a coordinate. So, and remember, coordinates always go x, comma, y. So I need to make sure I put the 3 first, comma, then the 4. And that would be my final answer. And to make sense of it, this would be the coordinate where if you graphed these two lines, they would intersect at that point. Okay, I know that was a lot for your first one. I promise the more you do, the faster these go and they won't be as overwhelming. Okay, let's try another one. Number 2. Okay, so I'm going to look at these and I have to decide if I'm going to add or subtract. Now, I haven't given you a problem where you would have to subtract, so for now, let's just stick with adding them together and see what happens, okay? So let's go ahead and turn this into an addition problem, and if we're doing it right, a variable should get eliminated, and if it doesn't, that means we'll have to change something or maybe do subtraction. Okay, let's add them together. Up here we've got x plus 3x. That's like a 1x plus 3x to give me 4x. Okay, so those didn't get eliminated. Maybe the y's will. Looks like they will actually. We have a negative y plus a positive y, which goes to 0. Those will cancel each other out. So we can go ahead and cross those out, go like that, which is great. That is what we want to happen. Let's bring down our equal sign, and we're going to do 10 plus 18 to give me 28. So we've created a new equation now. We've got 4x equals 28, even though it's just a little spread out. So go ahead and solve that one now, which we would divide both sides by 4. And we get x equals 7, which is half of our answer. Okay, from there, we want to, I'm going to draw a little arrow up here to show we are continuing math. We want to pick either of these original equations to use where we can plug the 7 in place of one of the x's. And it's up to you. I'm just going to pick the top equation here. That one looks simple enough. But you'll get the same answer no matter which one you pick. X minus y equals 10. That's the one I'm using. Now, I know I got x equals 7. So 7 is the value of x, which means it's got to go in for the x variable specifically. Okay, so instead of x minus y, I'm going to put 7 minus y equals 10. All I've done is replace x with 7. And now I want to solve this equation for y. So I want to get the y by itself. So we always look at the thing furthest from it. We want to get rid of that guy. It's a positive 7, so we get rid of it by subtracting 7. 7 minus 7 goes to 0. Don't forget, this negative is with the y, so you got to bring down negative y equals, over here it's just 10 minus 7, so just 3. Now, the y is not totally by itself. We want to get rid of the negative on it, and the easiest way to do that, which we've talked about how to do this in many ways, but just make it positive, y'all. Just make that a positive y, but don't forget, If you change the sign on it, you have to change the sign on the other side. So that would become a positive y equals a negative 3. And then that would be what your y variable equals. So we solved for x, solved for y, putting it together as a coordinate with the x first would be the coordinate 7, negative 3. Okay, let's try another one. Number 3. Okay, so let's continue with trying addition. Now, I will say you may want to just stop and pause for a second. Well, don't pause the screen, but maybe don't write this down yet because I feel like you might have to do some erasing. All right, watch what's going to happen here. I'm going to add them together in hopes that a variable gets eliminated. Okay, let's take a look at it. So we've got x plus x. Careful, don't just cross those out because they look like they'll cross out. X plus x, y'all. That's 1x plus 1x. That is 2x. That does not go to 0. Okay, let's look at the y's. 4y plus negative y. Or you can think of that as like 4 plus negative 1, which would be a positive 3y. And this is where I would pause and I would stop and I'd be like, nothing got eliminated. And when I say nothing, I mean one of the variables. It didn't get eliminated, and that's not good. That means I need to readjust. So I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to erase this plus sign. This is going to be a case where addition doesn't work to eliminate your variable, so you want to try subtraction. And now I have some issues with subtraction. Like, I can show you, and if you were in class, I probably did show you. You can do subtraction. This will work, I promise. It's just a lot of kids, they have a hard time with subtracting negatives. If you have a calculator handy, that'll be your best friend on stuff like this, or at least you can check yourself as you go. But if you struggle with subtracting negatives, definitely double check yourself with a calculator, or ask me kind of a little trick you could do to solve this. But I do want to show you the subtraction way, and you're more than capable of doing it. So let me show you. Subtracting straight down now. Let's try it. So I'm going to be doing x minus x, which goes to 0. That's 1 minus 1. So that is going to cancel out, which is good. Now be careful with this. This next is a positive 4y minus a negative 1y. That is 4 minus negative 1. If you're entering it to a calculator, do it just like that. Okay, be very mindful this is a minus sign. So if you do 4 minus negative 1, remember how like minus and negative, if you ever see that, you can just replace it with a plus sign. So that's really just 4 plus 1 right here. So subtracting those, you get a positive 5y. Bring down your equal sign. And be careful over here. I had a lot of kids say 16, but you're subtracting again, y'all. So you're doing 13 minus 3, which gives you 10. Okay, so that's the subtraction piece. It's very doable, but you have to be careful. Okay, just be careful with all your negatives. All right, now from here, we solve for y. So we divide both sides by 5. 5s will cancel. We get y equals 2. Okay, so this had us cancel out the x and we solve for our y variable. And now let's go ahead and solve for the other variable by using one of the original equations. Pick whichever one you want. Really doesn't matter. I'll just pick the top one again. Let's rewrite that one down. X plus 4y equals 13. Now, be very careful here because on all these other ones so far, we plugged in, like on the one above, we plugged in a 7, x equals 7, in for the x spot specifically. But this one's different because 2 is not an x value, it's a y value. Make a mental note of that, y'all. This is y equals 2. So that means we're going to plug that 2 into the y variable. Make sure you plug it into the right spot or you'll get the wrong answer. Okay, so I'm going to bring down my x plus 4. Instead of times y, I'm going to replace y with the number 2. So times 2 equals 13. And I just always put parentheses around the thing that I'm plugging in. All right, now we solve. So go ahead and do the math. 4 times 2, that's 8. So x plus 8 equals 13. And then last step to solve for x would be just subtract the 8 from both sides. So we get x equals 5. Oops. Okay, now you have both of them. Make sure you put them in the right order. That's the easiest part though. Make sure the x goes first, so 5, 2. Okay, so we've seen 2 addition ones, 1 subtraction one, so you guys know how that goes. So let's see if you can start looking at the problem and figuring out or anticipating whether you're going to add or subtract. So take a good look at this and try to think like, what's best? If I add them together, will anything get eliminated? Let's think about that. Don't write this down, but if we add them, my mind always goes, or my eyes always go to the variables like this that have the exact same number in front of them. That's what you want to locate. These x's are not going to eliminate whether you add or subtract, so I kind of ignore those. You want to look for matching coefficients, which I believe that said it in the notes up here. Yeah, you want to eliminate the variable with common coefficients. So that's what we look at. So I'm looking at these 2's right here. Now if I add 2y plus 2y, does it go away? No, if you add them, because they're both positive, that goes to 4y. So this is going to be one where we're going to want to subtract. Okay, so let's make this a subtraction symbol, because if you see 2y minus 2y, that will go to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel those out because we just said those are going to cancel when we subtract. Now let's be careful when we subtract everything else. Okay, so over here we've got 4x minus negative 2x. Make sure you look at the sign out here, y'all. 4 minus negative 2. Well, that's really like 4 plus 2. So that becomes a positive 6x. We said 2 minus 2 gives us 0, so that cancels out. Bring down our equal sign. And then we're doing 6, let me highlight it again, 6 minus 18. Be careful with all your signs. That's definitely going to be a negative number. That's going to give us negative 12. Okay, so here's our equation. 6x equals negative 12. We solve that now by dividing by 6, which will cancel. And we get x equals negative 2. Okay, so you've done the hardest part. Now we just substitute it back in to find our y variable. So I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to pick, I don't know, the top equation maybe, because there's no negatives in it. There's one here. Really doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite the top one. 4x plus 2y equals 6. And now I'm going to plug this negative 2, because it's x equals negative 2, I'm plugging it specifically in place of x, right there. Take out the x, put in a negative 2 in its spot. So instead of 4 times x, I'm going to do 4 times negative 2 plus 2y equals 6. And then from here, we solve this equation. So we've got 4 times negative 2, which is negative 8, plus 2y equals 6. And now you are solving for this y variable. So get rid of all the things around it, starting with the one furthest from it. So I'm going to get rid of the negative 8 by adding 8 to both sides. Plus 8, which those will cancel. And we get 2y equals 6 plus 8, so that's 14. And then, of course, last step is just divide both sides by 2. 2's will cancel. And we just draw a little arrow. We would get y equals 14 divided by 2, 7. Okay, we found both of them. Now make sure you circle them as you go just so you can find them easily. And then you just got to put it in the right order. So that'd be the coordinate negative 2, 7. Okay, we got one last one, and then you guys can go try some practice problems. Okay, really take a look at this last one and try to decide if this would be a case where you add them or subtract them. So think about it. And you may have noticed the pattern by now. It's going to be the x variables that get eliminated, right? Look for the ones that have the same number in front of the x, the same coefficient. Now, because one is positive, this is a positive 4 and this is a negative 4, this is set up perfectly for us to add them together. That's what I look for. I look for matching numbers and make sure one's positive and one's negative. And if that's the case, I know it's going to be a cakewalk because I'm just going to add them. All right, so let's do the math. What is 4x plus negative 4x? Well, that is 0. That cancels out. Okay, and then we've got 9y plus 7y, which is all positive, so that's easy enough. That's going to give us 16y. And then we got 5 plus 11, which gives me another 16 over here. And just be careful because you do have 16s on both sides and that can be confusing sometimes, but you do still want to go through the same process where you divide by 16 here and also on this side. So these 16s will cancel and you'll be left with y equals 16 divided by 16 is just 1. Okay, let's substitute that back in or plug it in if you have that written on your notes so we can find our other variable. I will just pick the top equation again. So we've got 4x plus 9y equals 5. My y variable equals 1, so that means 1 is going to go in place of y, specifically right there. So let's bring down our 4x plus, instead of 9 times y, I'm going to do 9 times 1 equals 5. And let's solve. So that's 4x plus 9 times 1 is just 9, so the 1 really just goes away, equals 5. And then in solving for our x, we would now subtract 9 from both sides. That'll cancel out. We get 4x equals 5 minus 9 is going to be a negative 4. And then last step, divide by 4 on both sides. So we have x equals negative 4 divided by 4 would just be negative 1. And go ahead and write it as a coordinate very carefully. The negative 1 comes first, and then the positive 1, x comma y. And that is the very basics of solving using the elimination method. So go try some of the practice problems, and I will see you on that video.